Thank you very much. I'd like to start by thanking the Human Frontiers Science Program organization, from leadership to staff, for organizing the whole program and this meeting. I'm really excited to be here. And I'd also like to thank all of our collaborators who are part of this project. To start, as a show of hands, who experienced the wind here yesterday, either flying in or walking around the city? Yeah, all right. It wasn't severe, but it was noticeable. So our project is concerning how birds trying to get from point A to point B navigate through the wind. And you can see that this bird is reacting through wing movements, tail movements, whole body movements to unexpected gusts of wind. And so how do they do that? Well, we know that birds use multiple sensory systems to control their flight control. Over the large temporal and spatial scales, they use sensation of the magnetic field or polarized light to go over migration over long distances. Obviously, when they have a target in sight, they use vision. They're very good with their vision. But these short time scale, unpredictable gusts of wind are things that they almost certainly use somatosensation for. And that is really the overall question that we tried to ask. How do birds feel their way through the air as they're flying? So the structure of our group and our project involves, very much in the HFSP spirit, a collaboration between an aerospace engineer, Shane Windsor, who has a biological inclination, but he's very much an aerospace engineer, and myself and Sarah Woolley in our labs, I keep pressing the wrong button, who are neuroscientists who study vocal learning in songbirds and the neural mechanisms thereof. And so we got together and decided we would study how air movements affect feathers, how those feather movements affect neural processing, and how the brain can integrate this information to allow the birds to feel their way through the air. So we started in the periphery, and this is work in Shane Windsor's lab at the University of Bristol. And the first experiment involved taking wings, and these were initially museum specimens, and using a laser vibrometer to place a spot on different parts of a feather shaft, and using the Doppler changes in the reflection, measuring vibrations while giving acoustic stimuli to make small amplitude but very well controlled vibrations of the feathers. And it turns out that feather shafts carry information at particular frequencies from the air movements along their shaft. And it seems that there's a sweet spot around 90 hertz and around 300 hertz where vibrations are transmitted along the feather shaft. We did this both with museum specimens and with anesthetized animals, and it does seem that there's some small differences with the anesthetized animals, and so probably the feather insertion into the live tissue in fact matters. Now, we also wanted to know how more realistic airflow affects wing vibrations and feather vibrations. And so we have put wing specimens, museum specimen wings, in a wind tunnel, that's the word, and using particle image velocimetry, where small particles are blown across the wing, and these green flashes that you see are sheets of laser light that scan across in the dimensions coming toward us. And high-speed videography allows calculation of the velocity flow around this volume around the wing. And this can lead to a description of the velocity of flow, not just statically, but also in time across this. And so we are setting up now to combine in this situation with laser vibrometry to look at how, in this situation, the wings, the feathers are vibrating. Of course, these movements are affected by flow rate, that is the velocity of the air, and by angle of attack, and by wing position. And so we're varying all those parameters and trying to collect a data set to describe how feathers move in these various conditions. Now, how could feather movements be transduced by the body to give rise to a sensation? Well, it's thought from other work that there's a special type of nerve ending in the skin of birds that's used not only for this process, but that seems to be well suited for the transduction of movements into neural signals that would be conducted into the animal. And this is the Herbst corpuscle. You can see it here. The nerve ending is right here, and then it's surrounded by a set of supporting cells that is roughly in that shape. So we first wanted to ask where these are. This is a very simple descriptive question, and through very painstaking work in my lab, where we were able to make something like 1,200 sections through a wing, stain each section for the Herbst corpuscles, find each one, remap them, and reconstruct it in 3 dimensions, we've been able to find where they are. They're indicated by the orange and magenta spots here. These white shafts are feather insertions, and these elements are bone. And you can see that largely these Herbst corpuscles are located on the trailing edge with a few on the leading edge of the wing. We've only done it from one wing at this point. The next 4 are in process, but we found something like 150 to 180 Herbst corpuscles in each wing of, and I didn't say this work is on the zebra finch. So they're there. How would their information be transmitted into the spinal cord and then up to the brain? Well, we started looking at nerve cross-sections, taking specimens from different places along the wing. And this is this is just a partial section stained with osmium tetroxide to look at the axons within that nerve. And we've used machine learning techniques to be able to measure the diameter distribution. And what we're finding is a broad distribution, but in particular, the largest axons, which would be expected to conduct action potentials at a highest velocity, probably something that's important for the animal to react quickly to changes in airflow, it turns out to be about 150. So we think that these may be the ones that innervate the Herbst corpuscles. We are still trying to test that directly, though. Of course, we'd really like to understand the neural encoding of these signals. And so we've begun to record electrically from nerves at various positions along the wing. And we have mixed results. We've been able to record some action potentials. And so this is an example recording over a period of time after an extended stimulation. And we can record up to three different waveforms, suggesting recording action potentials from 3 different axons. So far, we do not yet have reliable responses to single feather stimuli. We are working on, in fact, we've just gotten working an actuator that can stimulate a single feather that we think will be able to give us much more specific stimuli. At McGill, they've begun to record behavior, and ultimately we want to have a behavioral assay with an unpredictable gust of wind that will affect the bird's flight. We haven't added the air puff yet, but we have studied how these birds fly, and there's new information that we've learned in studying these. So we've set up an arena that has different lengths, and I'll show you data just from a 60-centimeter flight from one perch to another. And in the zebra finches like to fly to other birds. They're very social. And so we use smart glass to induce flight from this perch to this perch, and then we turn off the glass and the bird will fly away, and then we open the glass again and it'll fly back and forth. And so we can analyze these flights quantitatively, and they'll make dozens of them in a day, and you can see what this looks like here. Smart glass opens, comes back. The perch actually has a sensor, so the system knows when the bird has arrived at the other perch, and that opens the smart glass and induces the bird to fly back. And so it's been using some of this sort of basic biology to get data. And then we've been able to use deep lab cut, modern machine learning technology to measure beak position, wingtip position, and tail position, and analyze the data quantitatively through this process. And you can see what one flight looks like in slow motion. And you'll see the analyzed wing positions shown here. Okay, and so how do you analyze that? How do we understand how this works? So several things came out as we just looked at the data. First, if you look at wingtip elevation, it's very easy to see that the bird stops flapping in the middle of that flight. That's called a bound, and it's a mode of flight that many birds use, but not all birds. And certainly these zebra finches do use that, as you saw in the video. And during the bound, they fold their wings in, and they're making a ballistic flight. So if you look at multiple of these trajectories, what's shown here is the beak position in the height dimension versus the horizontal axis during multiple flights. Early flights are shown in gold, and later flights are shown in black. And the bounding is shown in this sort of diamond-shaped trace. And so what you see is, with time, with experience, maybe with practice, the bird flies higher and flies a somewhat more stereotyped flight from over time. And looking at that quantitatively, if you look at a pairwise comparison of a multidimensional assessment of the flight trajectory, that variability goes down. The birds become more stereotyped. They also become faster. If you measure flights over multiple days, they get shorter in duration, as shown by that red line, and quantitatively, you can see that over days, each bird averages a slightly faster trajectory. Moreover, they become, across all birds, more stereotyped in when they have their bounds. So this is a heat map showing day of training or practice over going from the first day to the last day, average probability of bounding at different length bins, and you can see that they become more stereotyped as to when they make these bounds. So why do they bound? Well, we tested multiple hypotheses for how they do that, and this involved making a really simple model for what goes on during flying. What's the energetics of each flap? What is the ballistic nature of the flight during the bound? And we put some limits on the height and acceleration. And it turns out that they don't seem to optimize any particular variable. We looked at flight time, minimum energy, bound time, all these variables. And we sort of said, that's interesting. Well, it turns out that if you look at the flight parameters that optimize both energy cost and flight time, the data actually come, and that's shown in the model in red, different kinds of parameters that optimize a combination of those two. The birds come pretty close to that. So it appears that they may be converging on a solution that optimizes flight time and energy cost. So what's next? Well, just constructed is a head-mounted wireless recording device that will allow us to place electrodes into the somatosensory regions of the brain to record electrical activity during flight. And then we intend to add these gusts of air. Now that we have them flying in a very stereotyped flight pattern, we know where to put a little jet and give them gusts of air to try to disrupt their flight during that time. And so what we see now is that the biomechanics of the feathers seem to be optimized for sending certain frequencies of information to the feather shafts. There are specialized neural systems that can transduce the recording, the vibrations to neural signals and transmit them into the brain. And apparently there's optimization of these flights for speed and energy efficiency, and we're looking to understand the encoding of that sensory system. I want to add 2 comments here. We've done nothing with what the birds actually do or how they might take sensory information and convert it to motor responses. That's a whole field waiting for the next maybe HFSP proposal. We'll see. But it's, we recognize that that's a really important question, and we do not have any idea about the circuitry or the algorithms that the birds might be using to respond to unexpected gusts of wind. And then our drive has been to understand this basic biology question. How does this work? But it's clear from the interests of an aerospace engineer and just by thinking that what we learn from this process could, in fact, help affect aircraft in how they respond to unexpected gusts of wind. And so I want to, again, thank all of you, and thank the HFSP program for the support, and I'm happy to take questions.